like she said, going to be talking about composition and framing. I've been a wedding photographer for 5 years now. I graduated from Columbia. Um, I, when I graduated, I didn't start my business initially. I kind of like dabbled in all different sorts of photography and design and all different kinds of stuff. And eventually got asked to shoot a wedding and sort of fell in love with that whole side of things and have been sort of running with it ever since. And I don't know if anybody plans to start their own business one day, but it's a very fun and challenging and terrifying thing all at the same time. So I do have a little knowledge definitely in the whole composition side of things. So I'm just gonna kind of go over a few basic rules to hopefully help you with things in the future. Okay, so there's something that's called the rule of thirds. You guys kind of read that, but I'll read it to you. The rule of thirds is a powerful compositional technique used to create dynamic and interesting images. It stems from the theory that the human eye naturally gravitates to intersection points that occur when an image is split into thirds. So kind of look over here. So this image is split into thirds both vertically and horizontally, and there becomes 4 intersection points. So the idea is that just naturally, whenever you look at a frame, your eye is going to gravitate towards one of those points. So ideally, when you're framing an image, you want the important parts or the focal point of your image to be on one of those points. So you can kind of see this image that I use as an example. You know, I kind of wanted her hair going in front of her face to be the focal point. So that's why it kind of falls right along that intersection of those lines. And kind of along the same principle, the lines themselves, so for instance, if you're taking a picture or framing like a person or a building or something that's vertical, you typically want them to fall along those vertical lines, whereas things that are horizontal, like a horizon, or if you have something where like a wall meets a floor or something like that, wherever you have any sort of horizontal lines, kind of rule of thumb is to keep them along the horizontal. So, you know, there's obviously room to kind of do your own interpretation whenever you're framing an image, but that's sort of like just a rule of thumb is your eye is naturally going to go to one of those points, so to keep the interest in your image at those points. And so this is kind of just to sum up what we sort of talked about. The intersections are the focal points, which is where the 3 lines, 2 lines on each side come together. So there's 4 intersections, which is where you naturally, your eye would naturally go. Keep the points of interest on the intersecting lines, which is kind of the same thing. Use the lines to imply movement, kind of what we talked about. If you're, you know, if somebody's looking down a line, then your eye will naturally go down that way. Create interest with composition. Maintain balance. Stop and think before you compose. So I think that's really the biggest one is sometimes you get, especially, you know, like I'm a wedding photographer, I'm moving like 1,000,000 miles an hour on a wedding day, but just taking that little bit of time to just sort of stop and think, how can I make this better? Shooting it, but then, you know, moving around, seeing maybe there's a different angle, if I go up, if I go down, move around them, like see where I can kind of make it more interesting. Be creative with negative space. It's like, I remember when I started, everything I did was centered, and not just centered in the frame. It was like the person's head would always be right here. So it was like had all this empty space above them, and it was just it was not good, I'm just gonna be honest. And so kind of learning to just, okay, how can I make this more interesting? How can I make this, you know, take that negative space, and instead of just being dead above their head, like have them be over here and have this, you know, really interesting sort of out of focus background. And then remember, it's a rule of thumb, and don't be afraid to break the rules. You know, my style is very, you can kind of see, but it's very like light and airy, and sort of there's a lot of movement, and it's bright, and I don't know, I always think like white is what I always think of. Like I love images to be super bright, and I love backlight and this like glowy sun. Like that's sort of my style. I have a ton of photographer friends whose style is like crazy flash, and it's all like really saturated colors and really intense. But you know, I think sort of figuring out what your style is, and then it really allows you, like that what we talked about, kind of like stop and think about your composition. Like that's going to reflect your style. So if I have photographer friends who literally shoot all of their subjects like looks like they're 20 miles away, and they're these tiny little people on the bottom of the screen. You know, like, it's so opposite of mine, but it's beautiful, and that's what they want to do. You know what I mean? So if you're whatever you are going to be shooting one day, you know, kind of bring your style into that.